Hey there viewers, and welcome back. Have you ever wondered, how do I recycle most of this? Like the spring, the booty, the little insert thingamadoo on the top? The answer to your question is the OTC Strut Tamer Extreme 6591. I'm pretty sure there's a new one of these machines out. It's the same thing, different color scheme, you know, the usual. So pretty simple, easy machine to use. There is the floor edition that rolls around the shop, and then there's the wall mount edition, all of which are used for removing the coil spring from your struts. Let's get started. Right, so to make this happen, there's a couple of basic features on this machine. First off, 4 jaws. I definitely like that from a safety standpoint. I absolutely hate the threaded rod version of these that you can purchase. So what we're going to do is we're just going to flip these little jaws open. Okay, none of this actually gets tightened down with a wrench. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to place the strut, and you also notice that I'm able to expand and contract the jaws. You'll notice I'll have to get a wrench because these are a little bit snug, but you'll notice that we have some locks over here on the sides of the machine to kind of keep control of the spring while we compress it. Pliers? Yes, use pliers because you really don't have to tighten these very tight. So yeah, you heard me right. The #1 repair, at least at the high school, for this machine is kids will break off the like grade 8 bolts that hold them little stops on because we're not comprehending lefty-loosey, righty-tighty. Anyway, we're gonna get a good bite here on the bottom. So don't tighten these down too tight, but we want really this to be as close down here without hitting this second link on the spring, if you will. Okay, so about right there. That's going to give us the best bite possible up here on the top. So the top kind of ends up where it ends up. Again, everything's just kind of finger tight. I like this machine, but the parts are like stupid expensive for it. Now, you see how we can flex. No good, good, no good, good. Guess where you're going to set them 4 little locks. We're just going to move this guy in, snug it ever so gently. I tell you folks, I use pliers on it, and the reason is when I tell kids to do that, they can't get it tight enough to break the bolts off. Again, because I've repaired this, unfortunately, several times in this area. So all these guys are going to do, and this is ribbed, this surface here is ribbed so it grips exceptionally well without forcing things down. All these do is keep the spring from jumping around while you compress it. So they're just a safety mechanism. Next, everything's in, everything's secure. We're going to go ahead and it's got an arrow on top up here on which way to turn it. So we're going to turn it counterclockwise, and you can see that it's slowly compressing the spring. How far do we compress the spring is the next question. Till the strut's loose. So you can see it's holding the spring. The strut is loose, which brings us to our next step. On the top of the strut is our next item of interest. If you want to pull a really dumb move, take this nut off without the spring compressed. Probably going to get hurt, so don't do that. We're going to use a Allen and a 3/4. I'm just going to squeeze, and this nut has been removed so many times that it just glides right off with most of the threads sort of still intact. But yeah, that process is pretty universal for these struts. So once you take the nut off, I'll just set this nut on top of the machine for the time being. You can take this guy and the adapter for your car, which, you know, in this case, I mean, clearly you can see it's definitely still good. We might as well reuse it. we'll take this top cap and then the little booty. So if the booty's destroyed, it's time for a new one. Once the booty is out, you can take the strut out. We'll just set that on the table. To uncompress the spring, just turn the handle in the opposite direction. How far do you turn it? Far enough that the spring is loose. If you go too far, it starts to tighten, and that's no good. So you see, you hit that sweet spot, and you can take the locks loose on it. I usually just do the bottom first, so then I can flip up, and then you see the top will be nice and loose as well. So what you're looking at here is an insulator, the strut with the bumper that is removable. You're looking at the coil spring, and there should be an additional rubber insulator here at the bottom. So if any of those parts are bad, you can simply replace them separately. Typically, we're just going to replace this strut, and it's pretty obvious that it's weak. For one, it doesn't spring back, and it's really easy to compress. So that tells me the gas charge has gone out of it. It's garbage, even though it doesn't have a ton of oil running down the side of the strut. So you can't always judge them by how much oil is leaking out of them. So if we're going to replace the strut, we're going to reuse the spring, reuse the bumper, and the upper little insulator slash strut rod protector. Now here's the deal. It comes down to the money. If a lot of these components are trashed, your springs are sagging, your car or truck's not sitting quite at the height that it's supposed to. Let's say the bumpers are trashed, the little dust boot is trashed. It's probably cheaper to get what's called a quick strut. And a quick strut is that entire assembly that I just showed you delivered in a box. So you can buy it all pre-assembled with new springs, new hardware. It ends up typically, most of the case, being cheaper than it is to buy the pieces that you need separately. So if you do an inspection and your reusables, if you will, look good, it's definitely worth it. Just throw a strut on it, everything's fine. Do your alignment and all that stuff afterward. If the pieces are wore out, probably go buy a quick strut, put everything new on, do your alignment. The only thing that I'm not doing on this particular strut is I don't have an upper bearing plate. The front wheel drive cars don't have an upper control arm on their McPherson setups anyway. So there's a bearing plate built into that strut. And a lot of times, if you turn the steering wheel, you get clunks and things like that, and looseness, and it kind of feels like the tire might be loose, those types of things. That bearing plate is just completely wasted. So definitely check that out. I usually recommend just replacing that anyway. I can't quite coach a price off the top of my head, but definitely that upper mount where we took that bolt off needs to be inspected on the front two struts. Now the back tires, obviously, they don't rear steer, so this piece is very much still good on this car. Let's go ahead and put that strut back together. So you guessed it, the spring is directional. There is an upper and a lower side to it, so typically the lower side has the bigger coil and the upper has the smaller. It needs to match your bearing plates, if you will, on the top. Your insulator needs to be nested nicely on this top coil here, otherwise it's probably going to make noise. And the same with the insulator on the bottom. While you're looking at the spring, if the paint is destroyed, there's a bunch of rust, any nicks and chips, go ahead and replace that spring because it's going to break really, 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 really soon. So definitely in that case, quick strut's got your name on it. So kind of the opposite of before. I go ahead and I'm going to just toss this top in here. Finger tighten everything. should fit in pretty much the exact same position that you had it before. If that is the case, you'll know it's all going to go together good. Do a slight compress. That's going to allow us to clip the safeties on in the bottom. Kind of square everything up. Everything's still nice and lovingly vertical. So you're going to go ahead and apply the compression. It's typically a bigger squish than you would think because there's no compression on the springs. So what we're going to do is we're going to extendo this guy. We would put our insulator rubber in here on the bottom. Don't ask me why it's missing from this specimen. We'll put the bumper on it. Okay, looks like how it was before. Then I'm going to go ahead and slide this guy up from the bottom, and you can definitely see we have plenty of compression on the spring. We're going to not forget our little bumper. We're going to put this guy on, okay, and him, you see I got plenty of threads here to make everything work. Awesome. We're going to put the nut on. Okay, next, we're simply going to tighten the nut. I suppose we could just turn the shaft of the strut too, whichever's easiest for you. You don't have to go all hog wild on it. Okay. Once that's complete, you are going to turn the insulator on the top so that you can get the tail of the spring to tuck into. I don't know if this one's got a little slot on it or not. Doesn't look like it does. Some insulators got a little cup notched out. Usually the bottom one does. You can kind of see that here, and you can also see I can't quite get that clipped in, so just going to give this another little turn or so. Okay, and then you would get your insulator lined up down here and all of that other good stuff, and at that time you can release the tension and everybody stays put. Okay, there's our bottom. That's open. So this side. There's a strut. Okay, lastly, we're just going to give it the old visual inspection in, and doesn't really matter, but in. You would want to also make sure, sometimes you can turn this top piece. You see how I can do that. You would want to line up, kind of pre-line up, like this is on your knuckle down here, and then this has to poke up in the trunk of the car. You'd want to pre-line up those, those bolts as best you can, or those studs, what have you. This would be ready to be installed on the car. Well, there you got it, folks. That is how to use the OTC Strut Tamer Extreme. I'm not sure what's extreme about it, but maybe it's extreme in the way that it rolls around the shop and is extremely handy. I like that. I like it a little more than a wall mount, just because you can, put it where you're at and put it away when you're done, and it's not really in your way. So, lastly, some, just depends what you're working on. Cars will need a 4-wheel alignment when you change their struts. So, the price isn't a whole lot different whether you do the 4 or the 2. So, once it's in the shop, it's in the shop. So, definitely, if you're going to do struts, I kind of recommend doing them at a minimum, because people always want to save money. I get it. To do them in pairs, but definitely, if the front ones are wasted, the back ones are probably wasted as well. So it's worth your time to go back there, do your inspection. I like to replace all four. You can actually do them pretty cheap if you just are buying the struts, but if you're buying the other stuff that makes everything work nice and silent, it may be more cost effective to do the quick strut option and then head over to the alignment shop. Or if you're doing this in your shop, you probably do your alignments in-house, but we don't do that here at the high school, just kind of for logistical reasons and the price behind it and trying to get things right and stuff like that. So that's for another day. Hey, with that being said, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.